Today we're looking at all the latest NHL trade rumors from places like Elliotte Friedman's 31 Thoughts blog and TSN Insider Trading with some updated information on teams like the Montreal Canadiens, Vancouver Canucks, Edmonton Oilers, Florida Panthers, Philadelphia Flyers, of course the Buffalo Sabres, and even the St. Louis Blues. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of teams to look at here and the latest updates on the NHL trade rumors. Obviously, we're getting closer and closer to the NHL trade deadline coming up on April the 12th, and a lot of teams are starting to posture here, trying to see what they can do to improve their teams ahead of the NHL playoffs. There's not a lot of teams that are officially, basically mathematically at least eliminated that are definitely going to be sellers. There's a few teams kind of, on the brink here that could make some changes or, might know better what their standing situation is going to be here in the next week or so, which will certainly dictate which direction they head in, which could free up some more players here on the list to likely be moved ahead of the deadline. But first up, let's take a look at the Buffalo Sabres. Obviously, Taylor Hall's the big name there. According to NHL insiders on TSN, they're saying that Kevyn Adams, the GM of the Sabres, is getting a lot of calls on Taylor Hall, and it's more likely than not that he wait and be traded closer to the deadline, because of course, as each day goes by, the prorated cap hit will become a little bit less since we're a little bit deeper into the NHL season, and that very well could be a factor. Now, the Sabres are still looking for a first-round pick for Taylor Hall, which I think is going to be difficult for them to get, but they figure if they wait and hold on here, that as time goes on and that cap hit goes down a little bit more as each day goes by, that maybe they'll have a better shot at getting it. But certainly, there's lots of teams inquiring. We've talked a lot about, whether it be the Bruins or the Leafs or the Islanders. I mean, one team that Elliotte Friedman mentions in his blog that came out today was the St. Louis Blues. I mean, he's wondering if the Blues would be interested in Hall. He also mentioned this briefly on Saturday Headlines as well, indicating that the Blues, of course, have, they're not in the greatest spot in the standings, but they could add and try to give themselves a little shot of offense here because they've had trouble scoring as of late, and wondered if Taylor Hall might be something they would check into. Now, in his blog, which comes a few days later here, he does indicate that he's received some pushback when talking to his Blues sources. Now, we've also seen some information from Andy Strickland on Twitter as well, who he covers the Blues closely and has a lot of Blues sources that indicates basically that he doesn't think they're interested in Hall at all, but they, could be open to doing something. We know that Doug Armstrong is not afraid to make big moves. He's done it before, even when the team was not guaranteed a playoff spot. We've seen him trade Kevin Shattenkirk. We've seen him make trades like Paul Stastny and get some decent returns, even though the team still had a shot at a playoff. So we'll see what the Blues do. But Hall, certainly one of the big names in Buffalo, getting lots of attention. Of course, other guys like Brandon Montour likely to get traded as well if the right deal comes along. I mean, he's a pending UFA. Likely not going back. We've already seen Eric Stahl already be traded. I mean, there's some other guys generating interest there too, like Ristolainen and Reinhart, who are not pending UFAs, but certainly guys with a little bit of term that have had interest as well. So it'll be interesting to see just how much of a shakeup there is in Buffalo after the NHL deadline. Now, according to Elliotte Friedman, another player on the Sabres that could be moved is Casey Mittelstadt. The young center iceman has really struggled with his development in the first few years of his NHL career. Things are not going well, and you have to think that maybe a change of scenery might be what's best for him before things get too far gone, while he still has a chance to get his career rehabilitated here. I mean, to a degree, you have to think, like as I mentioned before, that Rasmus Dahlin looks like he's completely broken. I mean, not just on ice, but off ice. Listen to his off ice interviews, like post game after they lost to the Flyers in dramatic fashion the other night. Like, I feel bad for him. Like, Rasmus Dahlin just looks totally dejected, no confidence. The comments coming out of there is crazy. So, I mean, you obviously look to guys like I already mentioned here that could be moved, but you really could see a drastic overhaul with this franchise if all these guys end up getting traded. I mean, I'm not sure that they want to trade Dahlin. I mentioned it should be their top priority to bring in the right defensive coach to help him find his game and get him back on track, as he should be a huge part of the team's future. But the way he looks right now, he's certainly a player I think it would be fair to say he could benefit from a change of scenery. I just don't know if the Sabres really want to go down that road here, but certainly add Casey Mittelstadt as a prime young player. We could see swap maybe for another young player to see if they get a change of scenery and get a fresh start and can move on that way. Now, there's some rumblings as well from TSN Insider Trading saying that the recent struggles of the Flyers, they may be exploring the goaltender market market to get some goaltending help. They want to be able to give Carter Hart as much time as he needs to kind of reset and work on his game. Obviously, part of what could be going on with Carter Hart could be a bit of a mental issue as well. And sometimes the goalies just need a time away to kind of work with their goalie coach, not focus on having to play, and just to kind of regain their focus and their form here. And that could be something that could benefit the young goaltender who's really facing the most adversity he has so far in his young career. I mean, Brian Elliott's been in there. He hasn't done the greatest either. And, he's only one guy. So they could certainly be looking to the market here to add some additional help. Jonathan Bernier is a name that came up that they mentioned that could be being looked at. But we do think, based on other information, according to Dave Pagnona, thefourthperiod.com, and even my own, speculation without having any sources directly, is you have to think that the Flyers might be up to something big. They put Shane Gostisbehere on waivers today. So you have to wonder if he's going to be claimed, because he is... he's still 27, has a decent contract. I mean, if he can get playing the way he did. Many people think that his game changed when they hired Alain Vigneault, and that if he can get a fresh change of scenery with some different coaching, that he could become a stronger, more offensive defenseman again, even though he's got some shortcomings on his own end. Still, you're willing to live with that if you get the 50 to 60 points a season he used to give you. So we'll see here, but obviously the rumor is that the Flyers are looking to free up some cap space for a much bigger move, and they could be looking at a much bigger shakeup. I can't help but wonder if a big name could possibly be involved in that. If you look at their top of their lineup, I mean, I know there was talk before about James Van Riemsdyk maybe being a trade candidate. They have to factor in the expansion draft coming up as well and who they might lose and maybe preparing for that. So it's really difficult to say. They need help on the back end, but I also think that, the bigger names with the bigger, more expensive contracts that could give them more flexibility, or more so in the forward group with like Giroux, Voracek, JVR, etc. So we'll see what the Flyers do, but Dave Pagnona indicates that he really feels that the Flyers are working on something big. Now, if Gostisbehere does clear waivers, it doesn't mean he won't be moved here. It could be leading up to a trade. We saw Christian Wolanin go through waivers the other day with the Senators, traded a day after clearing. So it happens a lot. Teams obviously want to have a look at them and consider taking them off waivers, but sometimes they need to have money go out or a contract go out as well to make it more worthwhile to offset their books as well. So we'll see what happens, but I think Philadelphia could be a really interesting team to watch here over the next 2 or 3 days. Now, there's also talk on TSN Insider Trading that the Seattle Kraken, even though they don't officially have any players yet, are getting a fair bit of calls from NHL teams ahead of the deadline as well. And you might be thinking, well, why would that be? And the thing is that teams are looking to make trades, and a lot of the trades we've talked about have expansion draft implications. If they go out and get another defenseman, for example, who would probably be their third or fourth best guy, well, you know what? You can only protect 3 in the expansion draft unless you go with the 8 skaters, which for most teams doesn't work. Then you're going to lose a good forward. They want to know from Ron Francis, like, if I make this trade and my roster changes, what's it going to take from you to not take this player off my hands when I just acquired him? And they're trying to work out deals ahead of time. And from what we're hearing through TSN is that those requests are coming back with a pretty high price tag, that in order to give you any kind of certainty on a certain player not being taken from your team that you might be trading for, they're looking for like first round picks and top prospects. So it's not going to come cheap at all. And I don't really think that teams are going to really be able to deal with Seattle a whole lot here before the deadline, because they're going to be having too high of a price tag, really, that it could deter teams from making trades. We've talked about that before. Obviously teams learn their lesson hard from the Vegas expansion, and I'm not sure they're going to want to be making and brokering as many deals here with the Seattle Kraken ahead of this upcoming expansion draft here in the summertime. So we'll see what happens, but interesting to see that the 32nd NHL franchise with no players is actually getting a lot of calls ahead of the trade deadline. And of course, as we mentioned as well, I want to talk quickly on the Montreal Canadiens. Elliot Friedman again mentions in his 31 Thoughts blog that he is convinced they are not done. Now, Marc Bergevin will continue to make other moves to free up space and maybe add in other areas that we haven't seen him already do. And the prime candidate to be moved would be Arturi Lehkonen, maybe Paul Byron, maybe a Victor Mete as well. Those are the main players that they likely would trade if indeed something materializes here. But obviously the past week when they've been shut down due to the COVID protocols, he feels that could be a big reason why we hadn't seen anything as of yet. Of course, the Habs return tonight. They're currently playing the Edmonton Oilers as I record this video. So they're back, and now that that's all done with the COVID protocols, they're back in action here, that he feels it's more likely that we could see a cap clearing type of trade out of Montreal to then set them up to make one more last move here ahead of the deadline, which many feel would be on the blue line. They've already got Eric Staal that they traded for. They signed Cole Caulfield at a college, who's going to go play a little bit in Laval and could be called up. I think they're fine with the forward lines. I think, like I said, if they add again, it's on the back end. They got good goaltending. Defense is clearly where they're at. So we'll see here if Marc Bergevin does indeed make some cap clearing trades in the short term to set himself up for another fairly substantial acquisition ahead of the trade deadline. Now, I want to touch on the Vancouver Canucks as well. Now, Darren Dreger on TSN Insider Trading is reporting that they're making progress actually on a Tanner Pearson contract extension, and he may not be traded after all, which I kind of find a little weird. I really thought for sure Pearson would be traded, but they are interested in retaining him, and progress is being made, I guess, on a new contract. So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, no guarantees he gets traded, but things are progressing in the direction that he could stay. They've also had talks with Thatcher Demko on an extension as well. They got 3 big RFAs this summer, including Demko, Pettersson, and Hughes. It's going to cost them a lot of money. They need to make sure they get their cap situation in order as best they can so they can pay them appropriately and still have room to do other things to improve this hockey club. And apparently the progress on Demko has been really positive so far. And it seems like they're talking about a longer-term extension, which would be good to get him locked up at a reasonable price. I mean, obviously, the more success they have, the more they're going to cost. He had a solid, bubble playoff, and now he's having a pretty good regular season. So clearly, if they get him locked up now on a longer-term basis, probably would be wise, so they don't cost too much money. But then that also will give them a better idea what they have left to work with Pettersson and Hughes as well. So when it comes to the Canucks, that's certainly a big focus for them, and I think that is pretty much guaranteed they're going to be sellers at this point. We already know Travis Hamonic is indicated he won't waive his no trade clause. He had interest from Carolina and said no. We also heard that Adam Gaudette's pretty likely to get moved on, especially with the waiver claims we've seen them make lately, adding guys like VC and Boyd, even though they're on short-term contracts. It still, just makes it a more of a competition there, and it increases the likelihood that they do move on here from Adam Gaudette as well. But of course, again, we'll have to wait to be seen on that. There was a lot of talk earlier about Nate Schmidt maybe even being moved, but we'll have to see where things go there. But the Canucks certainly have some big decisions to make, and a lot of that has to do with paying their kids in the offseason. Now, when it comes to the division rival Edmonton Oilers, again, Elliot Friedman's mentioning here that Luke Glendening of Detroit makes a lot of sense for the Edmonton Oilers. They certainly want to add a bottom six center, somebody who's good on faceoffs, and that certainly would make a lot of sense. As I mentioned in a previous video, the connection and previous familiarity with Ken Holland from his days in Detroit would make a lot of sense. A player he's very familiar with, not something that's going to cost him a ton of money, and I do believe that Steve Yzerman in Detroit will have other interests besides Holland and the Edmonton Oilers, but certainly should be a player that almost certainly gets traded. It makes a lot of sense. Bottom six player who's good on faceoffs, a veteran guy. I say he's 100% going to be moved, just a matter of where he goes, but the Oilers are certainly near the top of the possibilities. Give me all your thoughts on everything discussed down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.